Your consciousness exists at a specific level. However, what most people don't realize is that this level is constantly shifting, and understanding where you are can completely transform how you experience reality. Today, we're exploring the 7 levels of human consciousness, from autopilot existence to states that mystics have spent lifetimes trying to reach. By the end, you'll know exactly where you operate most of the time, and more importantly, how to access higher states at will. Level 1. Unconscious awareness. This is the baseline state of human consciousness. Approximately 40% of our daily mental activity happens here. At this level, your brain is on complete autopilot. You're driving home and suddenly realize you don't remember the last 10 minutes. You're brushing your teeth while your mind plans tomorrow's meetings. You're in conversation but haven't heard the last 3 sentences because you were mentally rehearsing what you'd say next. Neuroscientist David Eagleman calls this zombie mode, the brain's energy-saving default setting. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for conscious decision-making, essentially dims its lights, letting procedural memory handle routine tasks. Studies from Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert show we spend nearly half our waking hours in this state, which is why time seems to vanish during commutes or household chores. But here's what's fascinating. This isn't mental laziness or a character flaw. This is your brain being incredibly efficient. Research from neuroscientist Tor Neurotranders reveals that your brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second, but only about 40 bits, that's 0.004%, reach conscious awareness. The rest operates beneath the surface. Unconscious awareness lets you walk, talk, drive, and perform complex motor sequences while your conscious mind tackles genuinely new problems. Think about learning to drive. At first, every action required intense focus, mirror check, signal, shoulder check, merge. Now, you're having a phone conversation, listening to a podcast, and planning dinner while navigating rush hour traffic. Your basal ganglia and cerebellum have stored those patterns, freeing your conscious mind for other tasks. The evolutionary advantage is clear. Our ancestors who could forage for food while simultaneously monitoring for predators survived. Those who needed to consciously think about every step didn't. Your brain evolved to automate everything it possibly can. But there's a darker side. Life on autopilot means missed experiences, forgotten moments, and profound disconnection from the present. Psychology professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi found that when people are asked what they were thinking about during daily activities, their answers often have nothing to do with what they were actually doing. Many report feeling like entire months disappeared because they were mentally absent, physically present, but psychologically elsewhere. You miss your children's childhood because you're worrying about work. You miss the sunset because you're scrolling your phone. You miss conversations because you're planning your response instead of listening. This level isn't just about efficiency, it's about the gradual erosion of lived experience. The wake-up call often comes in the form of regret. Where did the time go? I can't believe they've already grown up. I don't remember enjoying any of it. Unconscious awareness is necessary, but a life lived entirely here is a life barely lived at all. Level 2. Reactive consciousness. This is where most people operate most of the time, about 50% of humanity's default state, according to research from the Center for Investigating Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin. At this level, you're awake and aware, but you're fundamentally reactive rather than proactive. External stimuli control your attention like puppet strings. Notifications pull your focus. Emotions hijack your decisions. Cravings dictate your actions. And your environment determines your mood. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls this System 1 thinking in his groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Fast, automatic, emotional, and pattern-based. You snap at someone because you're hungry, a phenomenon psychologists call hangry, that reflects how blood sugar directly impacts emotional regulation. You buy something because an advertisement triggered a feeling of inadequacy or desire. You intend to check one email and somehow lose an hour to social media. A response carefully engineered by user experience designers who understand your dopamine pathways better than you do. Research from Stanford's Behavior Design Lab, led by BJ Fogg, shows that 95% of people operate primarily in reactive mode, responding to triggers rather than making conscious choices. Think about your morning routine. Your alarm goes off, you immediately check your phone. You see a notification, you immediately click it. You feel anxious, you immediately seek distraction. Stimulus, response. Stimulus, response. You're not in the driver's seat, your environment is. Neuroscience reveals why this happens. Your amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system, processes threats and rewards in milliseconds, much faster than your prefrontal cortex can engage rational analysis. By the time you're conscious of a feeling, your body has already begun responding. Your heart rate changes, stress hormones flood your system, and behavioral impulses fire. But reactive consciousness serves a crucial purpose. Quick reactions kept our ancestors alive. When a rustle in the grass might be a predator, those who paused to consciously deliberate became lunch. Those who reacted instantly survived to pass on their genes. Emotional responses also connect us to others. Empathy, compassion, and social bonding happen at this rapid, intuitive level. The problem emerges when we never move beyond reactivity, when we're permanently buffeted by impulses we don't examine. You react to your partner's tone and escalate an argument. You react to criticism and become defensive. You react to boredom and reach for your phone. Each reaction feels justified in the moment, but looking back, you realize you weren't choosing. You were being chosen by circumstances. Social psychologist Ellen Langer describes this as mindlessness, operating on programmed scripts without present moment awareness. You have the same arguments with the same people using the same words. You make the same poor decisions in the same triggering situations. You're awake, but you're sleepwalking through patterns established years or decades ago. The hallmark of level 2. You make decisions and later ask yourself, why did I do that? The behavior doesn't align with your values or long-term goals, but in the moment, the reaction was automatic. You didn't pause. You didn't choose. You simply responded to the stimulus like a biological machine. The good news? Recognition is the first step toward change. Simply knowing you're in reactive mode creates the possibility of something different, and that possibility lives at level 3. Level 3, reflective awareness. This is where intentionality begins, where you transition from being consciousness to having consciousness, from being thoughts to observing thoughts. About 30% of people regularly access this level, according to research on mindfulness and metacognition. This is the capacity to observe your own thoughts and feelings without being completely controlled by them. At level 3, you notice you're getting angry before you speak. You recognize a craving arising without automatically acting on it. You catch yourself in a negative thought spiral and consciously redirect. Most importantly, you create what Viktor Frankl, Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, called the space between stimulus and response. That crucial pause where freedom lives. This is what psychologists call metacognition, thinking about thinking, awareness of awareness. Harvard researcher Ellen Langer spent decades studying this state through her groundbreaking work on mindfulness. She found that people who practice reflective awareness show dramatically improved decision-making, reduced stress and anxiety, greater life satisfaction, and even enhanced physical health outcomes. In one famous study, she demonstrated that elderly men who practiced mindful awareness actually showed measurable reversal of aging markers. At level 3, the quality of your internal dialogue shifts dramatically. Instead of being thoughts, you witness them. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough, rather than I'm not good enough. That subtle distinction changes everything. One is absolute reality, the other is a mental event you can examine. You start asking fundamentally better questions. Why do I feel this way? What assumption am I making? Is this thought actually true, or is it a pattern from my past? What would serve me better right now? What am I not seeing? These questions engage your prefrontal cortex, pulling you out of automatic reactivity and into conscious choice. Mindfulness meditation specifically targets this level. When you sit and watch thoughts arise and pass, you're training the brain's capacity to observe without immediately identifying with or acting on mental content. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson's research at the University of Wisconsin shows that even 8 weeks of mindfulness practice produces measurable changes in brain structure, increased gray matter density in regions associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. Many successful professionals, therapists, educators, and leaders operate at this level. They've trained themselves to step back from immediate reactions and examine their mental processes before acting. Warren Buffett famously won't make investment decisions when emotional. Ray Dalio built a billion-dollar company on radical transparency and examining mental models. They've developed what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift perspective, consider alternatives, and update beliefs with new evidence. The challenge? This level requires constant practice and energy. Your brain naturally defaults back to level 2 reactivity because it's metabolically less expensive. Reflective awareness burns glucose. It's mental work. Level 3 is like a muscle that atrophies without regular use. Miss a few days of practice, face increased stress, or encounter strong triggers, and you'll find yourself snapping back to automatic reactions before you realize what happened. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize daily practice. It's not about achieving some permanent enlightened state. It's about strengthening the neural pathways that support conscious choice. Every time you pause between feeling and action, every time you observe a thought without believing it, every time you choose response over reaction, you're reinforcing those pathways. But here's what most people miss. Reflective awareness is still somewhat effortful. You're watching your mind, questioning your thoughts, consciously redirecting. It's vastly better than reactive consciousness, but there's still a subtle tension. The observer and the observed feel separate. At level 4, that begins to integrate. Level 4. Integrated consciousness. Only about 10 to 15% of people consistently operate at this level, according to developmental psychology research. At level 4, you don't just observe your thoughts. You understand the deeper patterns behind them. You recognize your psychological triggers, cognitive biases, emotional conditioning, and defense mechanisms. You've integrated your past experiences with your present awareness, creating what psychologists call psychological coherence. Developmental psychologist Robert Kegan, in his influential book The Evolving Self, calls this the self-authoring mind. You're consciously writing your own story rather than unconsciously being written by external forces, childhood programming, or cultural scripts. You make decisions aligned with deeply examined values. You understand why you believe what you believe, and crucially, you can update those beliefs when presented with compelling evidence. This is the difference between level 3 and 4. At 3, you notice I'm feeling anxious. At 4, you understand I'm feeling anxious because criticism triggers my childhood fear of not being good enough, which formed when my father constantly compared me to my older brother. I can acknowledge this pattern, have compassion for that younger self, and choose not to let it drive my current behavior. People at level 4 have typically done significant inner work. They've engaged in depth therapy, intensive self-inquiry, contemplative practices, or transformative experiences that forced radical self-examination. They've likely confronted and integrated their shadow, the parts of themselves they previously rejected or denied. They can hold paradoxes without anxiety. I'm both confident in my skills and uncertain about many things. I'm successful and still deeply learning. I love my family and sometimes need space from them. Psychologist Carl Jung described this process as individuation, becoming your actual self rather than the self your family, culture, or ego wants you to be. It requires what he called confronting the shadow, acknowledging the parts of yourself that don't fit your self-image. The ambitious person must face their laziness. The nice person must acknowledge their anger. The rational person must encounter their irrationality. Neuroscience shows that level 4 consciousness correlates with measurable brain changes. Brain scans of experienced meditators, psychotherapists, and people who've undergone transformative therapeutic work show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and stronger connections between brain regions responsible for emotional regulation and executive function. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps integrate emotional and cognitive information, shows enhanced connectivity. These aren't just philosophical concepts, they're neurological realities. The gift of level 4? Emotional resilience that doesn't depend on circumstances. Authentic relationships based on being known rather than approved of. Purpose-driven action that emerges from examined values rather than reactive impulses. The ability to navigate complexity, ambiguity, and change without losing your center. Clinical psychologist Dr. Tara Brach describes this as radical acceptance. The capacity to acknowledge reality, including uncomfortable truths about yourself, without judgment or resistance. You can admit I was wrong without shame. You can acknowledge I don't know without anxiety. You can say I need help without feeling weak. But this level has a cost. You can't unsee what you've learned about yourself. You become aware of your ego's strategies, your manipulation tactics, your self-deception. You notice when you're performing instead of being authentic. You catch yourself seeking approval, avoiding conflict, or protecting your self-image. This awareness can initially feel like burden. Ignorance truly was bliss. You also become acutely aware of how rarely others operate from this level. You see people trapped in patterns they can't perceive, defending positions they've never examined, reacting from wounds they don't acknowledge. This can create a sense of isolation, not superiority, but simply recognition that you're navigating reality with a different map. The transition to level 5 happens when integration extends beyond personal psychology to transpersonal experience, when my consciousness opens to something larger. Level 5. Transpersonal awareness. This is rare territory. Perhaps 2 to 5% of people consistently access this state, though many more experience brief glimpses. At level 5, consciousness extends beyond personal identity. The boundaries that usually define self become permeable. You experience moments where the distinction between self and other, between me and world, temporarily dissolves. You feel connected to something larger than your individual story, humanity, nature, the cosmos, or what various traditions call the divine, the Tao, Brahman, or pure being. Psychologist Abraham Maslow spent his career studying what he called peak experiences, moments of transcendent connection reported by artists, scientists, spiritual practitioners, and everyday people during profound encounters with beauty, nature, love, or creative flow. In his research, detailed in religions, values, and peak experiences, he found these moments share common features: loss of time awareness, feelings of unity and integration, sense that something profoundly true has been revealed, and lasting positive effects on personality and worldview. Recent research from Johns Hopkins University on psilocybin-assisted therapy provides fascinating neurological evidence. Brain scans during these experiences show decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain regions that maintain our sense of separate self and constant mental chatter. When that network quiets, people consistently report experiencing unity, interconnection, and what they describe as more real than real. Follow-up studies show these single experiences can create lasting increases in openness, compassion, life satisfaction, and decreased fear of death. But this isn't about drugs or religion. Though many spiritual traditions have developed sophisticated practices to access these states, it's about the subjective experience of unity, the direct perception that separation is somehow illusory. Einstein captured this beautifully. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. People who've experienced level 5 often report profound shifts in how they live: dramatically decreased fear of death, spontaneous increases in compassion and altruism, reduced materialism and status seeking, heightened creativity and ability to access novel insights, greater tolerance for uncertainty and mystery. The change isn't intellectual, it's experiential. They know at a felt level that they're not separate from the whole, even if that knowledge fades in daily life. Artists like Rumi, whose ecstatic poetry emerged from Sufi mystical practice, and scientists like Carl Sagan, who describe the cosmic perspective as recognizing our deep connection to the universe, touched this level and produced work that transcends their individual perspective. Their creations channel something larger than personal identity. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg calls this absolute unitary being, the experience of being unified with something that transcends individual existence. His research using brain imaging during deep meditation and prayer shows consistent patterns. Decreased parietal lobe activity, the region that orients us in space and creates boundaries between self and world, combined with increased frontal lobe activity, associated with focused attention and meaning-making. The brain's normal mapping of me versus not me temporarily suspends. But here's the paradox. You can't force this state through willpower alone. It emerges through practice, preparation, and often grace, something beyond your control. Contemplative traditions offer practices that create conducive conditions: meditation, contemplative prayer, time in nature, sacred plant medicines, artistic creation in flow states, service to others, or practices of surrender and devotion. But the experience itself arrives unbidden, often when you've stopped striving for it. The real challenge isn't the peak experience, it's integration. These states fade. You return to your separate sense of self, to mundane concerns, to traffic jams and bills and petty annoyances. The work is bringing transpersonal insight back into daily life, staying compassionate toward the difficult coworker, maintaining cosmic perspective during personal setbacks, treating all beings as connected even when they're hostile. Psychologist John Wellwood coined the term spiritual bypassing to describe what happens when people use transpersonal experiences to avoid personal psychological work. They've touched unity consciousness, but haven't integrated their trauma, their shadow, their interpersonal challenges. They float in blissful states while their actual relationships and responsibilities suffer. Healthy development requires both, doing the personal work of level 4 while remaining open to transpersonal experiences at level 5. Level 6, unified consciousness. This level is theoretical for most. Perhaps 1 in 10,000 people maintain this state consistently, if that. Historical figures like Gautama Buddha, Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart and Saint Teresa of Avila, Hindu sages like Ramana Maharshi, and modern teachers like Nisargadatta Maharaj are said to have lived here permanently. At this level, the distinction between observer and observed completely dissolves. There's awareness, but no separate you claiming ownership of it. There's no one having an experience. There's just experience experiencing itself. This sounds abstract, but there's neurological evidence it's real. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg's brain scan studies of advanced Tibetan Buddhist monks and Franciscan nuns during deep meditation show dramatic, consistent changes. Marked decrease in activity in the parietal lobe, which creates our sense of body boundaries and spatial orientation. Significant increases in frontal lobe activity associated with focused attention and unity experiences. Unusual synchronization patterns across different brain regions that normally function independently. Their brains exhibit patterns suggesting a literal neurological shift in how self is experienced. The networks that maintain I am here, world is there, go offline. What remains is awareness without the usual subject-object split. But this isn't intellectual understanding. It's a permanent shift in perception, not a temporary state. Those who report sustained unified consciousness describe life as witnessing itself. Decisions happen, actions occur, personality continues to function, but without the usual sense of a separate decision-maker or actor. Indian sage Ramana Maharshi described it as seeing from no point of view, consciousness aware of itself without mediation. Paradoxically, they often report heightened clarity and effectiveness, without the constant internal narrative, without defending and maintaining a self-image, without the friction of inner conflict. Action becomes effortless and precisely appropriate to circumstances. Zen calls this no mind, or mushin. The sword master who moves without thought, the artist who creates without deliberation. But communication becomes extraordinarily difficult. How do you describe water to a fish who doesn't know it's wet? Every word reinforces the illusion of separation. I and you and that. Language itself is built on dualistic distinctions that no longer match direct experience. This is why mystics resort to poetry, paradox, and silence. Rumi's Persian verses, the Tao Te Ching's circular, contradictions Zen koans designed to break conceptual thinking, all attempts to point toward what can't be directly described. Philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein concluded his Tractatus, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Some truths exceed language's reach. Social connection can also be profoundly challenging. When your fundamental experience of reality differs from 99.9% of humanity, how do you relate? Others' concerns, status, approval, security, pleasure seem transparent, like watching children play make-believe with utter seriousness. Not with judgment, but with clear seeing that it's all constructed. Many at this level withdraw from ordinary life, hermits, monks, cave-dwelling yogis. Others, like Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh or modern teacher Adyashanti, find ways to translate the insights while engaging in community, teaching, and service. They function in the world while not being of it, participating in the play while recognizing its play. The challenge isn't achieving this state, it's sustaining it through the demands of embodied existence. Hunger still arises, pain still registers, the body-mind continues its processes. The difference is identification. There's no one who owns these experiences, no separate self to whom they happen. In the words of Sri Nisargadatta, wisdom tells me I am nothing. Love tells me I am everything. Between the two, my life flows. Level 7. Beyond conception. This level exists at the absolute edge of what language can express. The mystics' cloud of unknowing. The Buddhist concept of shunyata, or emptiness. The Zen teaching of no mind, or mu. What neuroscientist Christoph Koch calls pure consciousness without content. If anyone has sustained access to this state, they likely aren't making YouTube videos about it. They probably aren't speaking about it at all. This is consciousness aware of itself prior to any arising experience, before thoughts, before perceptions, before even the sense of being a witness. Not transcendent bliss, that's still content, still an experience. Not peaceful void, that's still a state, still something. But the ground of being itself, the aware space in which all content appears. Various contemplative traditions describe this differently. In Advaita Vedanta, it's Brahman, pure, unconditioned awareness that is the substance of all reality. In Buddhism, it's Rigpa, or Buddha nature, the luminous emptiness that is both nothing and everything. In Christian mysticism, it's the Godhead beyond God, the infinite source prior to creation. In Taoism, it's the Tao that cannot be named, the nameless origin of heaven and earth. Accounts from mystics across traditions suggest consciousness without object, awareness aware of itself with no intermediary thoughts, feelings, or perceptions, the wave recognizing its ocean, the dream character realizing it's the dreamer. Not experiences of unity, but the recognition that there was never actually separation, never really an individual self that could become unified with anything. Philosophers like Thomas Metzinger, in his book Being No One, argue this state reveals that the self was always a construction, a useful fiction the brain creates for navigating reality, but not an actual entity. When that fiction completely dissolves, when even the witness dissolves, what remains? Neuroscience can map brain states correlated with various levels of consciousness, but can it ever access this level directly? Can the instrument observe the observer? Can consciousness study consciousness objectively when consciousness is the subject doing the study? This is the hard problem of consciousness that philosopher David Chalmers articulated, the explanatory gap between physical brain processes and subjective experience. The honest answer, those who know can't say, and those who say don't know. This level remains in the realm of profound mystery, described poetically by mystics, across millennia, but perhaps forever beyond scientific measurement. The moment you conceptualize it, name it, or try to grasp it, you've already turned it into content, and content isn't it. Zen teacher Huang Po said, "The Buddha nature and sentient beings are both without form. If you seek it through knowledge and by means of discriminatory wisdom, you will never find it." Another Zen saying, "If you see the Buddha on the road, kill him," meaning even enlightenment itself becomes an obstacle if you cling to it as something to attain. Perhaps level 7 simply points to the recognition that consciousness is the ultimate mystery, not a problem to be solved, but an irreducible reality to be lived. The eye cannot see itself. The knife cannot cut itself. Consciousness cannot become an object to itself without ceasing to be what it is. The truth about these levels. Here's what matters more than reaching any particular level. You're not stuck. Consciousness is fluid, not fixed. You might touch level 5 during a sunset hike and return to level 2 during a stressful meeting 30 minutes later. You might operate at level 4 in your professional life, but drop to level 2 in intimate relationships where old wounds activate. Research from the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley shows that even brief practices create measurable shifts in baseline consciousness over time. 10 minutes of daily meditation increases activity in brain regions associated with attention and emotional regulation. Journaling about meaningful experiences strengthens neural pathways related to self-reflection and integration. Contemplative walks in nature reduce default mode network activity, quieting mental chatter and opening awareness. Your brain remains neuroplastic throughout life, capable of creating new neural pathways and reorganizing existing connections. Every time you choose awareness over autopilot, reflection over reaction, you're literally changing your brain. Structure. Neuroscientist Richard Davidson's research shows that qualities like compassion, attention, and emotional balance aren't fixed traits. They're trainable skills that improve with practice. The goal isn't reaching the highest level and staying there permanently. That's spiritual materialism, treating consciousness like an achievement or possession. The goal is to expand your range of access and choose skillfully based on circumstances. Sometimes autopilot is perfect. You don't need reflective awareness to brush your teeth. Sometimes reactive consciousness serves you, quick intuition in social situations. Sometimes transpersonal awareness opens necessary wisdom, seeing beyond your small concerns during a crisis. The map isn't the territory. These levels are conceptual tools, not rigid stages. Real consciousness is messier, more fluid, more paradoxical than any model. You might experience elements of multiple levels simultaneously or cycle through them multiple times in a single conversation. What percentage of your day do you spend at each level? More importantly, where do you want to live? What practices support your development? What environments, relationships, and commitments either expand or contract your consciousness? Consciousness development isn't about transcending human experience. It's about inhabiting it more fully, with more awareness, compassion, and choice. It's about waking up to the life you're already living, the consciousness you already are. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, you already know the most important truth. Consciousness isn't fixed. It's the most trainable quality you possess. The question isn't what level you are, but what level you're choosing, moment by moment, right now.